Hi there. Today I'm going to be doing a continuation of my November wrap-up. If you haven't seen my last video, you can check out my review of the first 6 books I read in November. It's not doing that well, as are most of these wrap-up videos doing poorly on my channel. But anyway, today is the continuation of the next 6 books I read in November. Some of these books were finalists for the Goodreads Choice Awards in the horror category. Some were translations, and had a couple books that were vampire novels, and also deal with my favorite topic, women who are mad. So if you're interested, stick around and we will get right into the video. The first book I'll be discussing is called Dyscalculia, a love story of epic miscalculation by Camonghne Felix. This is a memoir that is structured like a series of prose poems. Now, Dyscalculia, I had to look up what this is, how to correctly say it, is the mathematical version of dyslexia, a learning disorder with math. And this is a story of a woman and her journey to self-recovery. I think that the book is marketed a little bit incorrectly. The inside flap mentions that it is about primarily heartbreak and her healing from heartbreak. And yes, that is a part of the book, but a lot of this is really one woman's mental health journey on the road to getting a bipolar 2 diagnosis, and her dyscalculia, which she weaves throughout this narrative as metaphors and similes to how she interacts and sees the world and her relationships with people. And dyscalculia is actually a symptom of her bipolar 2 disorder. There's a lot of trigger warnings, I want to say, with this book. It can be difficult to read. There is childhood SA. There are mental breakdowns, numerous mental breakdowns, not just after the ending of this particular relationship. There's self-harm, self-sabotage, self-destruction. And this begins when she is a young teen, preteen, like about the age of 12. It's really just a fascinating tale, and I did like the uniqueness of how she weaves her issues with math into this narrative. But I don't know if I personally was a huge fan of the writing style. I wasn't actually expecting it to be like prose poetry. And I also do think that the second half of this deals a lot with a particular relationship she has with a man. And I don't know if I love, at this age, at my big age of 37, reading about like first heartbreak. I think I'm just a little bit too old for it. I know. I think I would have liked this maybe more. It would have resonated with me when I was younger. She's very forthcoming, and she's not always you could say sympathetic character, because she essentially self-sabotages her relationship when she senses him pulling away. She then just like starts chronically cheating on him, and so she isn't afraid. I think it takes a lot of courage to be like really upfront about how much you yourself have done and caused harm to other people, even when you are in extreme pain and self-harming yourself. There is quite a lot of repetition, like I have mentioned, because it is so somewhat poetic in this. There were certain mathematical phrases I had to look up, but I think overall, it was fine. I feel a little weird rating someone's memoir. It's why I think I don't really read a lot of memoirs anymore, because it is so personal. I did love the line, "When you're healed, you tell the story differently." We can all relate to that. So I did end up rating this 3 stars, and I did love the cover. That's actually one of the reasons why I read this. I think the cover is probably one of my favorites that I've read this year. The next book I'll be discussing was The Buffalo Hunter by Stephen Graham Jones. I heard about this through the Goodreads Choice Awards, the horror finalists, and I did end up voting for this in the second round. This stayed with me long after I finished reading it. This is a combination of historical fiction and horror, and I think it was done so well. It is a Native American vampire revenge story, and it is based on real events that happened to the Blackfoot people. someone's compared this to a Native American interview with the vampire, which I think is a good way to describe it. So we begin this story in somewhat the present 2012, and this young professor, her name is Etsy, she gets a hold of this recently discovered diary that was found buried in the walls of an archaeological site. And she finds out that this diary belonged to like a great-great-great-great-grandfather. And so Etsy's story is bookended in this novel at the beginning and the very end, which wasn't really something I loved, but I'll get to that in a minute. It's kind of like an epistolary novel, but you don't actually feel that way when you're reading it, which I think is well done, because I'm personally not a fan of epistolary. And we have two different, you could say, perspectives going on here within the bulk of this story. We have a Lutheran pastor who is known as Arthur Beaucarn, who was he's a pastor in Montana around the year 1912. And then one day he notices this Native American man who starts showing up to services and staring at him. And they eventually get to talking, and this Native American man, who's known as Good Stab, he has a lot of different names throughout this, is a Blackfoot Native man who wants to tell his tale to Arthur Beaucarn as to how he became a vampire and how he became this so-called monster and how he has lived for many decades surviving. And there is a reason, we will find out, why specifically he wants to tell his story to Arthur Beaucarn. Now, I did initially have trouble reading this for a variety of reasons. One was the writing style. So it is historical fiction, and a good part of it is told from Arthur Beaucarn essentially writing from his perspective diary entries about his meetings with Good Stab and how he feels about that. And then we go into Good Stab's perspective of him telling his story to Arthur Beaucarn over the years. But besides the fact that it is historical fiction and it is written in this archaic language and a lot of like flowery vocabulary at times, you also have a lot of Blackfoot Native terms that are used, and I don't know why the editor didn't do this. There absolutely should have been a glossary for this, because there are so many different names for animals and places and other tribes. And there is, I did find online like a complete list. I think someone wrote in like Medium or something that has all of these terminology that's listed out. But I also do think too that Stephen Graham Jones has a very particular style. And I know I'm not the only one who has said this. And for some reason, when I was reading this, it took me a while for like his style to click in my brain, because for some reason it wasn't clicking. And then all of a sudden it did, and I was fine. The story that this is based on, the real events that this novel is partially based on, are the Marias Massacre, which happened in 1870, the U.S. Army against the Blackfoot people in Montana. I love any sort of account where it is told from the perspective of the colonized. And as someone who has read a decent amount within the past year, 2 years of these kinds of accounts throughout the world, of people who were the victims of settler colonialism. Settler colonialism is a very specific kind of colonialism. And I can just see the parallels between what is done here, what was done to the people of Australia, what was done to the Palestinians, and still is. And even when Arthur Beaucarn is coming up with all of these excuses as to why the white Europeans had to do this and that, and talking about how you guys didn't really use the land, and if we didn't take it, someone else would. And it's just like, I'm just struck by the parallels. I mean, there are so many good lines. One of my favorites is, "What I am is the Indian who couldn't die. I'm the worst dream America ever had." Another thing that struck me was Arthur Beaucarn saying to Good Stab, "You can't stop a country from happening, Good Stab." And Good Stab says, "But we were already a nation. We didn't ask you to come." Settler Colonialism 101. Towards the end, as Etsy's perspective is bookended because the diary ends, it took me out of it. And I kind of feel like maybe that wasn't necessary, or we could have incorporated her more into the bulk of it. I don't know. It just was a little bit abrupt and jarring. And then there are supernatural elements that happen in the present. And there was at one point where I'm like, ooh, this is getting a little off the rails. But I thought the ending was good. I thought it wrapped up well. So, yes, this novel is very bloody. It's very gory. Even if there weren't vampires involved, it would be very triggering and upsetting. There's a lot of death of people, children, animal deaths, although most of the animal deaths are wild animals. So, I know we tend to feel differently about our pets, but yeah, it's a hard book to read, not just the subject matter, but the writing as well. But I mean, this is right up my alley, and the closest thing I can think of to this, where you have the account of the colonized and real historical events, but there is a supernatural element to it, is Terra Nullius by Claire G. Coleman, which is an account of the colonization of Australia told from primarily an Aboriginal perspective. However, there is a twist in it where supernatural elements happen, fantastical elements, which I won't say. So this really, I mean, I definitely want to check out more of Stephen Graham Jones's stuff, particularly his stuff that deal with Native Americans, because I have wanted to read more Native American writing for a while, and I just feel like I should, particularly because I am an American living in this country. And yeah, I rated this 4.5 stars. I think the only thing what kept it from being a 5-star read was, like I said, sort of the jarring abruptness of Etsy's perspective that was bookended in this, particularly tacked on at the end. It was a little bit, whoa, okay. But yeah, I highly recommend it, and I think you should check it out. The next book I read was Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata, translated from Japanese by Ginny Tapley Takemorei. This has been going around on booktube for quite a while. It is a very popular novella about a convenience store woman named Kiko in contemporary Japan. And she is deemed by society to be kind of a loser, insufficient, because she's 36 years old and she has stayed working at the same convenience store since she was 18. And she is definitely written in a way that is, she's coded as autistic, which you can obviously see because she doesn't understand typical human interactions, and she does a lot of masking with how she interacts with people and how she feels that she has to present herself. She sort of like mirrors people. Now, this is, I think, not meant to be like a deep character study. It is darkly humorous, and I think it is meant to be an allegory about how capitalism demands you become such a good little cog in the machine that it infects every part of your being. Because Kiko, over the years, has become one with this convenience store. When she is off the clock, she dreams about the convenience store. She thinks about it when she's trying to fall asleep. Everything in her life is centered around working at this convenience store. And so, despite all of the pressure from friends and family of, you need to get a better job, you need to get married, she continues to stay working here. And then one day there's a new employee who is this sullen incel man. I mean, there's no other way to say it. He's coded as an incel. And he is very entitled and a loser. He's a mooch. And he believes that he is deserving of a wife. And he loves to talk about how people have not evolved beyond the Stone Age, mainly women. And he and Kiko end up into this sort of strange relationship, a transactional relationship, as both of them are outsiders in a sense. And the story goes from there into some weirdness. It's very short. I enjoyed this. It was also a lot easier to read after having read The Buffalo Hunter Hunter. I felt like I needed to read something that was a little bit, it's not lighter necessarily. It is kind of, it's darkly humorous, but I needed something that was a little bit like text that was easier to absorb. These dogs make a lot of noise. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the commentary, ridiculing everything from just the ridiculousness of retail and productivity culture, and how people are forced to just check boxes off in order to be seen as acceptable to society. They need to like do certain things at this period in their life, And of course, yes, I mean, it's making fun of men who believe in this biological essentialism. It's not just a Western phenomenon. I rated it 4 stars. I do want to check out more of her work at this point. It's very short, but yeah, I recommend it. The next book I read was called Eleutheria by Allegra Hyde. This, along with Convenience Store Women, were part of my 10 before the end. I got this for about $1 at my parents' library. This is a cli-fi dystopian novel. It is set in sort of like the near distant future. I could tell that the author took a lot from current events in the US, particularly current events that happened a couple of years ago when she created this story. And so we follow this young woman named Willa Marks, and she grew up with parents that were like conspiracy theorists, doomsday preppers. They had a bunker in rural New Hampshire, and she lived there with them. And then tragically, something happens, and so she becomes, at a young age, she is into the care of her older cousins. It goes back and forth between between the main character's time at this Eleutheria, an actual island in the Bahamas, where this very exclusive group of climate change activists sought to create this very like green-friendly, solar-friendly, zero-waste compound that was supposed to be a model for the future as to how humans could adapt and fight climate change. And so we're being told this story from further in the future about her time there. And then also we get back and forth between her time that leads up to when she goes there, essentially. This novel, I have to say it didn't really stick with me. I think there was certain things going on in my life. That is why I had trouble getting into it. So I don't want to blame the book. Dealing with family stuff, right? We get her account of the island, life on the island, interacting with all the people there, particularly the head guy who, he's like a little bit culty, gives off kind of like cult leader at time. There is this sort of subplot of this lesbian romance that Willa has with a professor at a college that she sort of like loosely attends. And it was this professor that turned her on to the cult leader guy, Roy, his whole compound that he was planning. I was not really as interested in reading about the time at Eleutheria with the climate change activists, because I know that, from the beginning, as she's telling this tale, that it doesn't work out. I was more interested in the world that the author had created, where we're going throughout the years as to this present it's in the United States, and it's very similar to kind of our current situation. I mean, it was quite obvious that the president was based on Trump, but like the first Trump administration. It's just interesting to see, I think, how the author sort of created this like alternate present in a sense. I could tell that she had been definitely inspired by a lot of events too, I think, that happened in 2020. So the writing was a little bit flowery, maybe. She used the word ensconced a lot, like 4 times at least. There were a couple lines I did like. I did mark one that was, "We were going to suffer one way or another. Better to suffer on the way to making something new." But then there were other times where, particularly one line where I felt like the author was spoon feeding you. Like, there's one scene where children throughout the country start doing something. And I knew what the author was getting at. I knew that this was supposed to be symbolism for, you need to act now with climate change because we won't have a future. But then instead of thinking and trusting readers that we understand what she's getting at, she has to spell it out for us in the next paragraph. And I hate when authors do that. Trust your reader is smart and understands what you're talking about. So yeah, this was fine. I would rate it 3.5 stars. I ended up rounding up. Maybe I'll decide later on at the end of the year, next year, whatever, that it is more of a 3-star read. But for me, it's solidly 3.5, rounded up to 4 stars. The next book I read was The Piano Teacher by Elfriede Jelinek, translated from German by Joachim Neugroschel. Oh man, this book was bleak. This was something I got as a teen, and I DNF'd it, and I found it at my parents' house when I was visiting. And I am glad I DNF'd it, because this would have been too much for me to read as a teenager. This was published in 1983, and then it was a movie. It was adapted into a movie in 2001, I think. So this is, it follows a 36-year-old piano teacher in Vienna, Erica, and she was a former child piano prodigy, and she has this very domineering stage mother, and her mother was convinced that Erica was going to be a star, and that didn't happen. And so now Erica is teaching students at this academy, and her life is still very tightly controlled by her mother. She can't even go out without like giving a lie to her mom about where she actually is, and they even sleep in the same bed. And so Erica's two solaces in life are visiting adult entertainment in the seedy side of Vienna and engaging in self-harm. She begins to develop this interest in a student of hers named Walter. Thankfully, he's not actually underage. He is about 10 years her junior. He's 26. And he's an arrogant SOB, basically. And the feeling is mutual, but both of them have very different expectations from what they want from each other. And so they want they want like a physical lusty relationship, but Erica is a masochist. And so it goes from there, and it doesn't really go, let's just say, how Erica has in mind. I felt that the writing of this was arduous. It was arduous to get through. It is very dense. It is very wordy, almost pretentious, and the writing is often convoluted. There were pages of extended metaphors and daydreams that were almost borderline stream of conscious, but it's written in the third person. I had to read passages several times to understand what was going on. And I would say that this continues pretty much like in the first half of the novel. When we get to the second half, if you can get through that first half, it does get better, because instead of just like pages and pages of like navel gazing, she finally does have the characters actually create actions and do something. And that is when it actually gets interesting. Every person in this is awful. Everyone is a terrible human being. Erica, even if you feel sorry for her, Walter, and Erica's mother. There is one scene where Erica sees a female student flirting with Walter, and they're at a dress rehearsal, and she goes in the dressing room, shatters a piece of glass, and sticks the fragments in this girl's pocket in her jacket. Major trigger warnings on this book. Major trigger warnings. SA, very extensively graphic depictions of self-harm that I thought were overblown. Like, it was not necessary to go into that much detail. I'm not sorry I read this. It was definitely different. But just be forewarned. That's all I'm gonna say. And I've read a lot of stuff that does deal with, like, yes, like, BDSM, masochism kinds of themes and frank depictions of, like, sex and bodily fluids. Yes, I've read Mary Gateskill. Yes, I've read Melissa Broder and Ontessa Moshfegh, and they've dealt with at least one of these themes. But this was, like, another level, so, yeah. Just be forewarned. And I did end up rating it 3 stars. And then the final book I will be discussing in this video was Hungerstone by Kat Dunn. This was also a finalist for the Goodreads Choice Awards horror category, and it is also about a vampire and revenge. But this time it is Female Rage edition. This is more of like a gothic Victorian-esque type of novel. So again, historical fiction we're going into, and it is based loosely on the novella Carmilla, which I have not read. So I think if I had read, maybe I would have sort of a different opinion about this, but that's beside the point. So this follows a woman named Leonore. Her husband, Henry, is this big steel magnate, and they end up going to his estate out in the English countryside. This takes place roughly like 1890. And it is there that as they're traveling to the estate, they run into this young woman whose carriage is completely turned over. She's in an accident. Her name is Carmilla. They don't really know much of a backstory of her. And so Carmilla is kept there at the estate. And so she has some interesting interactions with Leonore. And Leonore needs to confront the fact that her husband is perhaps not quite who she thought he was. Because he has some plans for her. And she gets some help getting cued in by this woman named Carmilla, who is, yes, a vampire. Now, I thought the writing was fine. I think it was decent. It did have that sort of, it did capture, I think, that sort of like stuffy Victorian era stuffiness. I'm sorry, I don't know what other words to say. This honestly reminded me a little bit of The Silent Companions, a woman who had sort of like down on her luck, abandoned family, and she marries a rich factory owner, and then she goes out to his estate in the countryside and weird supernatural things start to happen. Very similar, I thought, as I was reading this. I don't know, though. I don't know if this quite gripped me as much as I wanted it to. I felt like the characters were all just a little bit flat. Like, I think I wanted to connect with them more, and there just really wasn't. Like, even when we're talking about Leonore's backstory as she was raised by her great aunt, it was just sort of talked about in a very vague way, and I don't know if I really, like, connected to her or anyone else as much as I wanted to. The overall gist is, like, Carmilla is sort of like this agent in Leonore's life for her to take charge, for her to finally feed the hunger, so to speak, that is within her. Hunger in more ways than one, we should say. It is a commentary a lot on how women are raised to be people pleasers and to never like put their own desires and wants and needs as individuals first. So yeah, I thought it was solid. I did end up rating it 4 stars, but yeah, I think I just need a little bit more of like more of the characters needed to have like a bit more dimension, I think, for me to like really, really have enjoyed this. I also thought actually that it would be a little more bloody. I thought there would be more of the vampiric element to it. And yes, that is there, but I guess I was expecting more horror, and it's more like Victorian Gothic. So yeah, it's solid. I rated it 4 stars. That concludes this video of the remaining 6 books I read in November. Let me know if you have read any of these books and what you have thought of them. And yeah, I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.